Digimodernism. So this week we're going to continue on from what we looked at last time when we looked at postmodernism, and we're now going to move on to the next stage, which is the death of postmodernism. But we're going to see that some of the aspects, many of the aspects of postmodernism are still well and truly with us. This notion of intertextuality, propaganda, but mainly we're going to be looking at this arrival of the digital age, this notion of the citizen as a journalist, how we can tell stories online, and the main features of Digimodernism. What is it? So, postmodernism has died, which seems like a crazy thing to say because postmodernism is a sort of a mishmash of everything. So why on earth would that die? Surely we would keep on doing it and keep on being postmodern. And this notion of whether postmodernism or post-postmodernism or post-postmodernism or digimodernism, whether we are in something new is still very much up for grabs, and we don't have a definite name for what we're in now, but we do know that postmodernism, whether we like it or not, has actually died. It's gone, and it died on 9/11, so the 11th of September in 2001, when the Twin Towers in New York were brought down by terrorists. Now, the reason why that heralds the end of the postmodern age is because if you remember when we looked at postmodernism in the previous video, the thing about the postmodern world is that all views are valid and people can pick and choose their personal truths, how the world works for them. Well, the problem with having all views as being equally valid, that means that none are truly valid. And that's not actually where we've ended up. So although we may have thought that actually we were, all peace, love and happiness and everybody getting on with exactly what they wanted to do in the world and things being equal and fair and so on, we know the reality is that those things are not true. We haven't got total equality. We haven't got a fairness across the globe. And different viewpoints are not valued as much as others, and that will always be the case because that's simply the way that human beings operate. We favour truths or stories, beliefs that really sort of echo with us, that perhaps fit in with things that we've already heard, beliefs we've grown up with, and things that, as adults, when we look around the world and we see how different people live their lives, we will be inclined to choose those versions that perhaps are most similar to our own or that we can find truths in. So that's what really ends 9/11, is very much that clash of cultures between, we could say, East and West. So that also arrives around the same time as the internet and the arrival of the digital revolution. So here's the digital age, and these particular images are probably not familiar to most of you watching this video if you're taking LL530, writing in the media, simply because these were before you were born. But this is what the internet used to look like. Netscape was the most widely used internet browser, so this is before the arrival of Google, Chrome. Microsoft was around, but they didn't really have a browser the way that they do now, with Internet Explorer, and then I've forgotten even what the latest one is called Edge. I can't remember, because everybody seems to use Google and Chrome these days, or Firefox, or Safari. But back in the 90s, when the internet first arrived and the digital age began, most people were using Netscape or something similar, and you needed to know exactly which web page you wanted to go to. So you would put that into your location. So you'd have to type in www. and then whatever the website name was. And there were search engines. Google didn't exist, but there were other search engines like Dogpile and Alta Vista, I think that was one, and various other, Ask Jeeves, and some that have perhaps carried on, but by and large most of them disappeared with the arrival of Google, which did it effectively, and it was free. So this was also back in the bad old days of dial-up. So some people who were quite wealthy could maybe afford a second telephone line, and that was just for their dial-up computer to be able to get online. Now it's something with the arrival of broadband in certainly most of the UK. There are still pockets around the UK that don't have broadband, which just sounds horrifying. But if you live in an extremely rural area, there isn't 100% broadband coverage, in the same way that there isn't 100% mobile phone coverage either. So those people are still stuck with the awful horrors of dial-up. And the way that it used to work is that you would dial up, or your modem would dial up, and that would get you online. And unfortunately then, if somebody wanted to use the telephone, and of course there wasn't widespread use of mobile phones at that point, you'd have to get off the internet. And as you can see there, if you tried to download anything that was more than a couple of megabytes, it would take a long time. This was before, as I say, the arrival of broadband, so you couldn't actually download a great deal, and it would take a long time. Maybe not 39 years, because of course things improved and things changed. So 9/11, even though we were still, certainly in the UK, we hadn't necessarily got broadband really widespread. People were still perhaps using dial-up, but it was beginning to get cheaper, and there was some broadband. We started to have, after 9/11, a huge rise in online journalism. So these two screenshots are from the Village Voice, which was an actual hard copy newspaper from Manhattan, so downtown Manhattan, Greenwich Village, which is why it was called the Village Voice. But they along with an awful lot of media companies, realised that actually the future was to have some sort of presence online, at least a simple website that maybe had a forum. And as it says there, Facebook didn't exist until 2004 and Twitter 2006. So this is before the arrival of Web 2.0, and Web 2.0 is pretty much the arrival of social media in the way that we recognise it now, and that happened in the middle of that first decade of the 21st century. So people turned to online spaces with 9/11, as you can see, to either pass comment or also to try and find people. And it's all part of this notion of Digimodernism. And this is something that Alan Kirby talks about in his book, Digimodernism, which is this week's recommended reading. And on page 51, he talks about how Digimodernism is more easily expressed as the rupture driven by technological innovation. So back in the early 2000s, the people who were getting online and using mobile phones to get online, and being able to send emails, which is mainly what people were using mobile phones for back then, the leading brand for getting online and doing all of that for businesses in particular, and it was sort of business people who could afford to have these. They were using Blackberries. And some of you may remember, maybe, you know, when you were in your early teens, possibly when you started senior school, if that was maybe when you first got a mobile phone, that, you know, all the cool kids had a Blackberry because you had a full keyboard on there. So this is also where we see the shift away from text speak and to actually properly formatted, punctuated, you know, and properly spelled words and messages, because, you know, we start to also have the arrival of predictive text. So iPhones come afterwards. I think I saw my first iPhone, blimey, I can't remember, but I know it was I saw it in America, in New York, and it was about 6 months to a year before they came out in the UK. But they, of course, you know, were a lot smaller than they are now. But, you know, this was the arrival of touchscreen, so it was the iPhone that led that, and of course then Androids picked up afterwards. But mobile phone technology is the thing that has really driven our technological revolution. And being called Digimodernism is no surprise, because it works on a number of different levels. So this notion of its digital modernism, and, you know, therefore no longer being analog. So like the difference between an analog clock that has hands that move around and you have to learn to tell the time, and a digital clock that just has the numbers. But also because we use our fingers, our digits, to actually communicate now quite often, and particularly now that we're living in a pandemic, we often use our digits to communicate more often than we do by talking to one another. So I mentioned this arrival of citizen journalism. Now with 9/11, you know, that meant that people were posting comments on forums and posting messages to try and find people that had been lost in all of the sort of the mayhem of 9/11. But the thing that really pushed citizen journalism forward was actually the tsunami. Which happened, I think, in 2004 or 2005. I'm not sure on the exact date on that, but that was the thing that happened around Christmas time. Some of you may remember it, but it happened. It hit, you know, across some islands, just sort of off the coast of Thailand. And you know, it was I think it was sort of like Phuket and places like that. And the thing that made citizen journalism really sort of be quite important here was the fact that this was a holiday destination, and there were not sort of big hubs of commerce, and therefore there were not large media companies there. But there were lots and lots of people there, wealthy people who had Blackberries, who could capture what was going on at the time. So, you know, it was a holiday resort, but people had the appropriate sort of communication tools, their Blackberries, to be able to post pictures and say exactly what was happening. And this hadn't happened before. And also one of the things that pushed it on, and we can see this is from 2009, and of course they've made a film about this since, is the aeroplane that went down in the Hudson Bay, so, you know, just off the coast of Manhattan Island. And nobody was hurt, you know, there were no deaths, nothing like that. Everybody got off the aeroplane safely. But the first that anyone knew about this having happened, I mean, aside from obviously people sort of keeping an eye on radar and so on, but the first that the media knew was somebody posting this picture on Twitter. And again, it was an individual who had a Blackberry. He was able to take the photo and then he could actually upload it to Twitter. So, you know, Twitter is now the place that we can actually gather an awful lot of instant news. And, you know, it's not necessarily always 100% correct, because it is very much the citizen journalist. So, you know, there may be things that are incorrect, there may be inaccuracies there, but it's certainly that sort of ground up, the grassroots of where the news happens is happening now, you know, and is being shared now online in ways that had never happened before. So you can see from these dates, you know, just 5 years ago, 81% of adults in the UK owned a smartphone. That will have gone up since then. And a smartphone is obviously an iPhone or an Android phone. So, you know, anything that will allow you to get online and, you know, has a screen. And that percentage rises, and this again was 5 years ago, that percentage rises to 91% if you only consider the 18 to 44-year-old group. And that means that, you know, people over the age of 44, and now we could bring that up to say 50, you know, if we say 5 years on, but it's pretty much universal in the UK that people, even older people, you know, in their 70s and their 80s, an awful lot of them, most of them, have smartphones. And it's very much a case nowadays that people who are perhaps within that 18 to 44-year-old bracket, or, you know, even the wider sort of just as adults, those that don't have smartphones, that is not because they can't get hold of one. It's often not necessarily because they don't know how to use one. It's generally a particular choice that someone has made, that, you know, they do not wish to have a smartphone because they don't want to have that sort of availability. They don't maybe like them, you know, lots of different reasons, but it's a choice, very much a conscious choice. So again, you know, these dating from 5-6 years ago, Reuters commenting on where and how people get news through digital devices. And, you know, this comes from Reuters, so you can actually go and have a look on the Reuters website and see what the updated news is. But also, this has been shared by the Nieman Lab, and Reuters is a media company, and the Nieman Lab is a laboratory, a place. It's a scientific sort of, but they actually do research into journalism largely. So, you know, you can go and find out an awful lot of industry information, and that may well be very useful to you, either when you're writing articles or when you're thinking about your critical commentary and you want to be able to provide clear evidence that what you have done, maybe with a layout or a story that you're writing, you know, maybe some aspects of the article that you're putting together, you want to perhaps back it up, support it with industry evidence. You know, I wrote this type of headline because this is what the industry says, you know, this is what the Google AdWords said, and so on. So, you know, don't just limit your references to academic ones, because the things to remember, or the main thing to remember about academic writing on about journalism and social media, is that it takes a long time to get an academic article, and certainly academic books. It takes, you know, often years to actually get something published. You know, an academic article, if you can get it published, go from submission to publication in 3 months, that's amazing, and an incredibly fast turnaround. Quite often, from submission to publication will be a year or maybe 2 years or longer. And, you know, if it's a book, likewise, it will take time. So industry information and research, that will often be turned around far quicker, because, you know, a company will go and do all of the research and then they will publish it. So it means that it's not necessarily peer reviewed, but it's coming from the industry, and they will then have all the facts and figures to back things up. So, you know, don't overlook the industry information. It can be very useful. And also, you know, things like this, knowing how many people in each country are actually using social media. Again, you know, this can be extremely helpful when you're thinking about, should I be using social media to actually get particular articles out there? And the answer is yes, you should. But you know, this is providing the supporting evidence that yes, people are using social media. And you can see that social media used by country, we've got a global average there back 5 years ago in 2016 of 31% across the globe. Now, 5 years on, I imagine that number has gone up considerably. And, you know, certainly I would recommend that if you want to talk about global social media and how social media has actually brought us all together within the world, I would go and find out exactly what the latest figures are. And I imagine that the latest figures probably date from 2019 or 2020. You know, it's highly unlikely that you'll get something from 2021. Okay, so one of the upsides of social media and mobile phone usage is how much global literacy has improved. And this is all part of the digital revolution. And, you know, whilst we might think, oh, you know, social media is not great, you know, it causes people to feel very anxious, and, you know, there are an awful lot of downsides, but this is what's really, really important about it: the increase of global literacy, and certainly across the continent of Africa. And you know, that's the other thing to remember, that when we're thinking about large continents, and you know, Africa is one of, if not the biggest continent, you know, there are lots and lots of different countries there. So that means that we have a variety of different countries that, you know, have different literacy rates, different types of commerce, you know, and are some countries are extremely developed. And you know, I think sometimes we're inclined in the UK to think back to various different fundraising events, things like Comic Relief and so on, which do an awful lot of good, but it means that quite often the stereotypical view we have of Africa, and you know, it tends to get taken as a lump, you know, as a country, and it's not. We have this idea that everybody in Africa lives in, you know, in poverty and so on and so forth, which of course is not the case at all. But what's interesting is that in some of those more developing countries, cheap mobile phones have been developed, and they are actually driving the economy, because people are using them to actually buy things and sell things, you know, and different versions of apps, rather like PayPal, are being used to absolutely push the economies forward. And it's again very much from the ground up. But as you can see there, you know, UNICEF have said that literacy rates have increased. So, you know, this is again something that's very much an upside of social media and having that connectivity and the digital world. And you can see there that this particular research comes from the Pew Research Centre. So, you know, along with Neiman Labs and things that places like Reuters put out, these are again places that you can actually go and find some of this information that is the industry information. And I would absolutely recommend that you familiarise yourself with that, particularly if you're thinking of going into not just journalism, but any media related job, and also things like marketing as well. So we can and we do also tell stories through social media, and you know, these will often be quite traditional fiction pieces that are sometimes, in the case of Joe Craig, I absolutely recommend that you go and see if this is still online. It may well be, it might have gone by now, but Joe Craig told this story back in 2016, which he put up online on Twitter, very much as a story told in a thread that appeared to be entirely true. Whether it is or not, you know, we don't know. But, and that's not uncommon. And there have been a few cases more recently where people have posted stories. There was a guy who posted a few years back, about 3-4 years ago, who told a story about taking going on a school trip with his children, and he was one of the parent helpers. And he was sort of telling this story, supposedly live tweeting it as, children were badly behaved and, various terrible things happened. And it then transpired that the entire thing was actually a fake setup. But it was a very amusing story. But, he did get pilloried rather for, having the cheek, the temerity to post a story that wasn't 100% true on Twitter or on any form of social media. So some well-known authors have actually used Twitter to tell stories, and it says that you can read it on Storify. Unfortunately, Storify is a website that has now disappeared. So that's also another aspect of this notion of the digimodern world, is that nothing lasts forever, and things come and go, and we've seen that with different forms of social media as well. Some people years ago were using things like MySpace. MySpace, I believe, still exists, but nobody really uses it. We're seeing a downturn in the number of people who use Facebook. And so things very much are led by trends, and things don't last forever. So absolutely, as I say, Philip Pullman has had a go of telling stories online. Lots of other writers have too. So it is possible to do this, and particularly now that Twitter actually allows you to have a thread, and also there are a number of different apps that will actually gather together the threads for you, and then you can sort of repost it. So Alan Kirby talks about how with Digimodernism and the Digimodern world, the author is also the reader. So, that line between authorship and readership has become very much permeable. So it means that, we curate our own reading. We no longer actually pick up a hard copy newspaper. We no longer go to the shop, the newsagents, or have a newspaper delivered to our house. Instead, we go online, and we may actually go to a particular news website, maybe the BBC, or maybe one of the other popular newspapers, and we may read a lot of the articles on there. But more likely, we're actually returning to social media of Facebook, Twitter, wherever, and we're instead picking up bits and pieces of the news, different articles from different sites, and we're perhaps reading not just within the UK as well. We're maybe reading an article from the New York Times, and then we're reading something from the Guardian, then we're reading an article on maybe the Daily Mail, and then something from the Times, and so on. And we're actually picking and choosing and curating our own reading. Now, that means, to some extent, we are becoming authorial, but it's also the fact that we are able to add to these texts. When we read an article that we find interesting, that perhaps really chimes with us, and we have something that we want to comment on, we can do that. For an awful lot of articles, we can click comment, and we can say exactly what we think about it. And, there are varying levels of truthfulness in those, and varying levels of anonymity. So, this is where, of course, people will be sometimes be quite offensive on those comment sections, if they can get away with not having to share who they really are. So this, of course, is one of the biggest problems with things that are found on the internet, because it is not regulated or governed. It means that there will be plenty of things on there that will be trying to sway somebody's opinion. And so we have an image there of Abraham Lincoln, who was a very, very famous American president, but I'm sure you all knew that. And you're not like the people on the video that's doing the rounds currently on Lad Bible, where people are, they're shown a photo of Abraham Lincoln and somebody says that they think that it's Michael Jackson. You know, you are all far more aware and knowledgeable, hopefully. Not least of all because you're undergrads and you're in your final year, and you know, so you know who these people are. But of course, that comment there, that quote, the problem with quotes found on the internet is that they are often not true. Well, there's no way that Abraham Lincoln could have said that because he has been long dead. You know, so he was the president when the American Civil War ended in the 19th century. So of course, he didn't know about the internet. But, you know, this is the problem. We have quotes attributed to people, and unless we go and check it for ourselves, we may well share things that are incorrect. And we'll sort of come back to that notion in a moment, this idea of fake news. But, you know, this idea of authorship, we can create things like that. We can create things that are not entirely true, but we can also create alongside the original author of a piece. So this is some screenshots taken from a Guardian website, a Guardian page, their television section. And if you download the slides on Moodle, you can actually go and read the article. That is a hyperlink to it. So this was a TV show that was shown 5 years ago called Modus, and you know, it was a Scandi noir TV show. So you know, it was I think it was from Denmark, and I'm not positive on that, but certainly, you know, it was a Scandinavian TV show that was a sort of a murder mystery thriller. Now, the writer, Ellie Violet Bramley, she wrote this recap and, you know, a general review of this TV show. But what's interesting is that when you go and have a look at this, or in fact any of the television pages on The Guardian, you will find there's actually a community of people who are regularly posting into the comments section, and they actually have created, as I say, a community. They know one another, they see one another posting regularly and commenting, and you know, it's gone beyond simply posting about their comments about this TV show. So, you know, we're seeing not just creating alongside and adding useful information and comments, we're also seeing the arrival of a different type of community, all based around the fondness for this particular type of TV show. So another element of digimodernism is this notion of things, as I said earlier, sort of constantly changing, this onwardness, you know, trends. And we can actually go and have a look at things like #IfIMe. And there are also on some of the, there's a page on Moodle that I've added in for this week that's all about social media, different bits of apps and so on that you can use with tools. That was the word I was thinking of, social media tools. And you know, there are various different things at the moment. So this is one that you can use, #IfIMe, to find out what hashtags are currently trending, but you can also have a look at things like the Google trending website, and that will tell you what is currently trending today, and you know, what are the top hashtags. And this can be really useful because you know then that there is a guaranteed audience, people who are looking at this particular hashtag, you know, or people who are talking about certain things online. So this can be, as I say, very useful when you're thinking about not just articles to write, but also how to approach promoting an article that someone else has written or that you've written. So Alan Kirby also says that haphazardness is another element of the digimodern world, and that means that things are not always read in quite the same way. And, you know, as it says, the text can go anywhere. You don't know what the response will be. It can end up actually taking a complete turn into something very different. So these tweets with the hashtag of what appears to be now that Cher's dead, it's not, that hashtag did not get posted originally with the intention of now that Cher's dead, because Cher, the singer, the American singer, is not dead. Instead, the original meaning of that hashtag was now Thatcher's dead, meaning Margaret Thatcher. And this is perhaps less common now, that sort of maybe misreading and, you know, not knowing exactly where the words begin and end because they're all lowercase. That's less likely to happen because people are now aware that if you use a capital letter to start each new word in a hashtag, it not only takes away that problem, but also it means that anybody who is using a text reader, you know, if they've got sight problems, that then reads it properly, you know, text to audio. So it means that anybody, as I say, with visual problems can actually still take part in things like Twitter, and they have it properly broken up for them because a text to audio will pick that up as different words. But, you know, this, of course, caused an awful lot of fuss in America just as much as the UK. But this is also where sometimes you might see something trending on Twitter and, you know, if you're not in the country where it's trending, you don't necessarily know what they're talking about. So evanescence, this notion of things being ephemeral, you know, not lasting forever, just disappearing. That's also an element. So not just with websites, but also this notion that once you've actually watched something or played something once, it just goes. So again, it's about trends. So I'm sure that all of you recognise all of those different people in that photograph where it says who nominated who. You know, if you do, well done. I personally, I know who they are in as much as I know who they are collectively. Individually, I've absolutely no idea. I know collectively they were all on Big Brother. But, you know, that's the thing. We have the possibility of watching things again. And an awful lot of TV shows, particularly drama shows and news and so on, a lot of them bear watching again for lots of different reasons. Something like the Big Brother show, that really doesn't bear watching again. Why would we? We already know who perhaps got voted off, you know, and we maybe don't want to return to it. Now, what's interesting about an awful lot of other reality TV shows that prove to be popular, things like the Bake Off and the Sewing Bee, and even things like RuPaul's Drag Race, each of those are reality TV shows, but they offer more than simply you're watching these people and they're going to get voted off. You know, with the Bake Off, we may want to return and watch episodes because maybe we fancy actually having a go at some of the recipes and we want to see how it turned out and what they did, you know, get some ideas. And also, you know, a lot of people like to watch things like the Bake Off and the Sewing Bee because they're actually quite relaxing television. So, you know, we may want to return to them for that reason. Things like RuPaul's Drag Race, people may well want to watch that again because maybe one of the contestants has become really famous, or maybe, you know, they are funny television shows and perhaps we want to watch them again because they make us laugh. Big Brother doesn't really do that. And we also have there on the right hand side, this was from a website called Us Versus Them, which was funded by the Daily Mirror, but was actually sort of independent, if you like. And the guy that did this, Rob Manuel, he is now behind Fesshole on Twitter. So if you've not come across Fesshole, it's where people essentially they add their confession to, there's a Google spreadsheet. Anybody can add their confession on there, and then he selects the most amusing, interesting ones and then puts them onto Twitter. So, you know, it has a huge following and, you know, continues to gain a following. He made this particular flash game where you could slap Michael Gove. And this was, you know, back in the past. You know, that no longer exists. So, you know, that's the thing. Particularly, we don't have, you know, Flash doesn't really work anymore. So unless some of those older online games are updated, we can only really go and look at them on things like YouTube, where we'll see a recording of them. So we also have, again, according to Kirby, this notion of reformulation and intermediation of textual roles. In other words, it's because I'm looking at blog, author and reader, what that means as an author, as a reader, those titles, those roles are reformulated, they're changing. Our roles as reader have changed, and you know this intermediation. You know, we can contact, we can comment, we can produce our own blogs, and we can become famous writers in our own right. You know, through our blogging, and you know we are no longer. So it's this citizen journalism. Has just become so important and so central to our lives, you know, that we have celebrities who are famous for using TikTok, for example. We also have this notion of anonymous, again, these taken from Kirby, anonymous, multiple and social authorship. So Wikipedia is entirely socially sourced. You know, it's written by the people. And anybody can add things to Wikipedia. Anyone can create a Wikipedia page. And you can see here that this screenshot is actually the most vandalized pages. And that's because anyone can actually go in and change something. As soon as you're registered with Wikipedia, you can go in and change things. And quite often, celebrities will have their pages vandalized. You know, if there will be sort of things added, maybe things like their date of their death, maybe added when people are still alive, you know, which is sort of quite a dark and unkind thing to do. But there will also be maybe comments about, you know, maybe creating false backgrounds for them. But, you know, anyone can have a Wikipedia page, absolutely anyone. And, you know, people don't tend, I don't think you're allowed to create your own Wikipedia page, but, you know, if other people find you an interesting person, they can create a Wikipedia page for you. And as I say, it can be edited by anyone, and, you know, it's absolutely a social authorship. Anyone can go in and edit it, change it, update it, and so on. So we also get things like this. And, you know, this is quite dated, and we can tell that it's quite dated because it's Facebook for BlackBerry, and, you know, who has BlackBerries anymore? So this particular thread is, as you can see, this guy Steve trying to tell a knock-knock joke. And then David comes along, and we have then, instead of a straightforward joke, we actually have a story starting to emerge from this. And, you know, this is very much, you know, emergent online storytelling, which, again, is something completely new that we haven't had before the arrival of the digital world. And, you know, it's imagined. So, you know, we have David saying, "Oh, hi, Stu, come in. It's been a while, what brings you around this way?" And that's in response to that knock-knock joke. Now, of course, the knock-knock joke should be, "Knock, knock, who's there? Irish Stew," and then the punchline, which we do eventually get. But actually, you know, David comes along and he subverts that. And instead of giving us the punchline or you know, sort of keeping to the rules, we have that haphazardness happening, and he actually starts to engage as if this was something that was really happening. And you know, we of course get this whole backstory of poor Stu being kicked out. Steve doesn't like it. Can we not do this again, Dave? I'm just trying to tell a joke. And then Tim gets involved, and you know, David then sort of really gets with that as well. Wait a second, Stu, I think I hear someone at the door, I'll go get rid of them. You know, so then Tim says he's Batman. Steve, you know, so we have this argument breaking out, but the thing is, this is less likely to happen now because if you begin a thread, as you probably know, on Facebook in particular, you can actually delete any comments you dislike. And of course, you can always delete the original comment anyway. But this just takes on, you know, an absolute life of its own, and ended up, of course, going viral. So it then sort of, you know, it continues on. Steve's still not happy about this. David and Tim absolutely riffing on this, and you know, and then Danny comes in, he's also knocking at the door, and then Ariane, you know, she enjoys it, she's really finding this very funny. Steve is getting more angry, and then finally, you know, it resolves. And of course, you know, Steve, if you don't stop right now, I'm unfriending a lot of you. And Danny gives us the actual punchline to the original knock knock Irish stew. So, you know, this is something that has only really happened in the real world before. So this is absolutely a shift from the spoken form. This type of thing, you know, is very reminiscent of conversation amongst friends in the pub. And here we have that being replicated in text. So linguistically, this is really important because we're seeing social media actually behaving exactly like speech. So text, it has become very much more fluid with the arrival of the digital world. And those of you that took language in the media last year will remember when we looked at this notion of transmedia and, you know, transmedial storytelling, and that's absolutely what's going on here with Sherlock Holmes. And, you know, we originally had the novels and short stories of Arthur Conan Doyle. They were then recreated in the way that a franchise does, by retelling the same story in different formats, so, you know, having films or TV shows of it. But what's interesting with the most recent iteration of Sherlock Holmes is that it actually goes beyond Arthur Conan Doyle's original text. So we have John Watson's personal blog. So this is telling his point of view. So it's actually transmedial storytelling. It's an aspect that enriches our understanding of this particular story and story world. And, you know, that's something that social media will allow us to engage with and to play around with. That, you know, we can keep on adding more stuff and changing things and, you know, creating different characters and being very playful with it. And transmedial storytelling is absolutely playful, but it relies upon the digital. So we can also tell stories using things like Twine. If you've not come across Twine before, it's completely free of charge and it's widely used by developers of video games and hypertext stories. So you can have, as I say, Twine is open source, so you can download it and you can start to actually tell pieces of fiction. You can write your own fiction and allow people to use hyperlinks to take you to the next part of the story, or maybe, you know, like a choose your own adventure story, to different places. And I would recommend, if you're interested in this, having a look at Porpentine. Porpentine's work is fascinating. They create not just very interesting stories, but the way that they have done it, the way that you are forced to reread certain sections, which are actually entirely new pages, but it looks the same, is a very interesting way of manipulating the reader. So, as I say, I would definitely recommend, checking out Porpentine on Twine. So, to sum up, we live in a digital age. We're not going to get away from it. We can't put the internet and the whole notion of Digimodernism back in its box. It's here, and we have to find ways to deal with it that are healthy and useful. So social media now, even more than ever before, since 2020, has become incredibly important and useful for keeping us connected to one another. The very fact that I can make this video, upload it to YouTube, as well as put it onto our university Moodle page, means that I can communicate with you. I can actually share with you this lecture that would normally be done in a lecture theatre. And the fact that we can use things like Teams and Zoom and FaceTime to communicate with one another and to see not just lecturers and teachers and students, but also our friends and family, that we can remain in contact and to see, even if it's a virtual seeing, but we can see one another. That has become crucial over the last year. We do tell our life stories this way because a lot of us are actually recording, whether we realise it or not, whether we're doing it actively or not, but we're recording our lives, our thoughts, our feelings, the events that have happened to us. We're doing that on an almost, sometimes more than just daily, single. We are perhaps even telling our life stories almost hour by hour on different forms of social media. This is how our lives are being recorded, but are they being archived? Are they being kept? And that's maybe something that we need to think about, as a society. How can we keep these stories? Because there are only a limited number of tweets actually saved on the Twitter servers. Likewise, with Facebook, what happens when somebody dies? What happens to the archiving of their particular Facebook page? And also, what happens in the future if Facebook becomes less and less popular and we maybe have lots and lots of photographs on there? What happens to those photographs? Do we download them all? Where do we keep them? So we are still perhaps dealing with that notion of how we keep all of this stuff. But, we can also tell fictional stories. And of course, as we looked at right at the beginning of term, every single piece of non-fiction writing, every article that we put up, they are still structured with a narrative. Narrative is how a story is told. This is how our brain architecture works. We can tell fictional stories online, not just our life stories, and not just the media telling us news stories. We can do the telling now.